They be on my page, I'm proud of you, but they be trolling me.
What's good, everybody? What's good? What's good? It's your boy, Cardinal Bud Crawford. And we're back for another one. Alright, y'all. Today's topic is keep it real. Why Terence Crawford is stalling the Errol Spence Jr. super fight until 2023 mandatories. Alright, y'all. So what do I mean? That's a mouthful. What do I mean by that? Why is Terence Crawford stalling out the super fight in hopes Errol Spence gets called by the sanctioning bodies for a mandatory? You know, there are a couple of mandatory fights out there that could potentially be made for Errol Spence Jr. in 2022. Well, the end of 2022. And that could potentially keep the Terence Crawford super fight from happening if Terence Crawford holds out long enough. Like, I knew it had to be a reason that he wasn't signing off on his contract. And I know a lot of people don't believe that there's even a contract out there. But I'm like, if there's not a contract out there, why wouldn't Terence Crawford have come out by now to at least address the rumors? You know, he hasn't even addressed the rumors. We have heard Floyd Mayweather, for some reason, come out and address these rumors. I'm still not sure why Floyd, you know, poked his funny turtle-looking head out. You know, I always thought that Adrian Broner had the most turtle-ish-looking head, but I'm starting to think as the older Floyd Mayweather gets, the more turtle-ish he looks. But I was always thinking, once this news broke, like, once the news broke, I'm like, you know, if it's untrue, Terence Crawford's immediately going to address it, or he's immediately going to sign it, because he's been hoping and hoping and hoping and hoping to have this happen for the past, year and a half, to have a contract sent to him so they can make the super fight, at least according to him. You know, he's always been like he just wants to make the fight. He feels like he's the better of the two. If he received a contract, it was my understanding that he would immediately sign it. And so when Errol Spence dropped the news, I'm like, well, why isn't this guy signing off on the fight after about a week? And after that first week, I was like, you know what? There has to be a contract, because he would have addressed it by now. And there has to be a reason he hasn't addressed it and he hasn't signed off on it. And I've given a whole list of reasons, and now I'm starting to think, now that it's been like 2.5 weeks, now I'm starting to think that Terence Crawford is using these Floyd Mayweather tactics to stall the fight out. And one really good tactic that he could possibly use that could help him is to hold out until the sanctioning bodies step in and force Errol Spence Jr. into a mandatory fight situation with one of these waiting in line young lions. Because let's keep it real. Errol Spence Jr. is holding 3 title belts. WBC, WBA, and the IBF. Now, there are 3 mandatories sitting behind all 3 of those belts, waiting for Errol Spence Jr. And the longer Terence Crawford holds out, the longer he refuses to sign off on the contract, and the more time is wasted, the sanctioning bodies eventually are going to go, you know what? Well, you can't get the Terence Crawford fight because, for whatever reason, you can't get him to sign off. We want you to face off with one of our mandatories. Whether that mandatory is Jaron Ennis, I know he's number 1 in one of those sanctioning body brackets. I believe Sindonius, I hope I'm saying his name right. I believe he's like a mandatory in one of those in one of those sanctioning bodies, and I think Virgil Ortiz might be the third one in one of those. And those are three very difficult fights. I would place them, you know, Jaron Ennis #1 in difficulty, Virgil Ortiz #2 in difficulty, and Sandonius #3. And I only put Sandonius as #3 because I've never ever seen the guy in a boxing ring. I barely know how to pronounce his name. You know, I had forgotten about the guy. You know, it's someone who Captain Full G actually brought to my attention. So, shouts out to Captain Full G. But very difficult fights. Now, why would he hold out in hopes that a sanctioning body stepped in and forced him to fight one of those guys? Well, the same reason I said the other day that Errol Spence might, you know, be okay with Terence Crawford matching up with Manny Pacquiao, you know, instead, because Manny Pacquiao might be able to loosen Terence Crawford up for the Spence potential matchup. Maybe, you know, maybe not beat him, you know, because I think a lot of people feel like Pacquiao's too old to beat either one of those guys. Not me. I think whoever you put Pacquiao in the ring with, he has a chance to beat. He definitely, you know, given if he would have been prepared a little bit more, he definitely could have beat Ugas in that fight. He didn't lose by much, but he did lose. So I feel like this. Terence Crawford is hoping for a loosen up fight. Which one of those guys would be more likely to end up with the Errol Spence Jr. mandatory fight? Now, I think at that point it would be up to Errol Spence to decide. Okay, well, I can't get Terence Crawford to sign off on our super fight. Which one of these mandatories would I rather face up with? Do I have a better shot at beating, and that I have less of a chance of getting hurt against? And to be honest with you, I would say Sandonius, because that's only because I've never seen Sandonius fight, or Sandonis. I hope I'm saying his name right, because I think a Jaron Ennis fight is extremely dangerous for Errol Spence or Bud Crawford. But, you know, we're talking about Errol Spence mandatory situations here. So I think that Jaron Ennis fight would be the most dangerous fight for Spence to take. But at the end of the day, could Spence beat him? I think if he can beat Crawford, he can beat Ennis. But it would just be an extremely, extremely, extremely dangerous situation to put yourself in. So I think he would more than likely avoid that fight, you know, for at least a year or so. That's if he decides after, you know, him and Terence Crawford face up. You know, he might decide to face up with Jaron Ennis if he decides to stick around 147. Because if he beats Crawford, I doubt he sticks around 147 for too long. You know, he's got the Charlos out there. He's got a bunch of other money he could go get. Then you got Virgil Ortiz, who I think is sitting at #1 in one of those brackets, I believe. I could possibly be wrong about it. He might be 1 or 2 in one of those brackets. Would he be willing to face off with Virgil Ortiz instead of Jaron Ennis or Sandonis? You know, I think Virgil Ortiz as well is an extremely, extremely dangerous fight because of his punching power potential. Would Spence want to risk, you know, taking some bombs, perhaps not getting knocked out? You know, I don't know if Virgil Ortiz has all the skill sets to beat Errol Spence Jr. similar to Jaron Ennis. But I know he has the punching power to beat anybody. So it would be extremely, extremely dangerous for him to try to face up with a Virgil Ortiz punching power. You know, so I think it would be less likely for him to face up with Ortiz. So then you go to the third mandatory, Sandonis. You know, I think that would be more than likely who Errol Spence would pick to face off with, because you know, it's less dangerous. He's more of an unknown. He's a weird style of fighter. So I think, you know, there might be some things Errol Spence can pick at, you know, as far as trying to as far as his technique goes. So maybe his technique is not all the way there. Not to say he doesn't have power or he doesn't have a little bit of boxing skill, but you would always want to pick the lesser of the three evils. And I think the lesser of those three evils is definitely going to be Sandonius. Even though Sandonius was supposed to be in that tournament and he was supposed to face off, I believe, with Ugas or something to that nature. And then when Spence ended up, picking Ugas to go ahead and fight, it kind of broke all of that apart. So, he was in line to fight Errol Spence, so perhaps the sanctioning bodies do step in and say, well, you were supposed to fight him anyway. You beat Ugas. You can't get the Crawford fight. We're going to match you up with Sandonius. And, we'll step aside for 2023 if you can make the Terence Crawford fight. Perhaps in the first quarter of 2023. But let's say Terence Crawford, decides to keep stalling. What does Terence Crawford do in the meantime? Because he does have that WBO belt, and I'm pretty sure he has a mandatory sitting out there somewhere with his sanctioning body step in and force him to face off with his mandatory. Now, his mandatory might be less dangerous than Errol Spence's mandatory, which, like I said, potentially could be Jaron Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, or Sandonius. Or he could possibly face off with Manny Pacquiao, which is an extremely dangerous fight, even though Pacquiao is still a little older, still extremely dangerous. Or he's been talking about this Jaron Ennis fight. Perhaps he decides to go up and face off with, not Jaron Ennis, but Jamel Charlo fight. He's been talking about that Charlo fight. Perhaps he goes up and tries to face off with a Charlo, and, which I think would be completely the wrong thing to do, because I think Charlo blows him out of the water, and I think Charlo, if he beat him, it would kill any. It wouldn't completely take it apart, but I think it would take a whole lot of luster out of that Spence Crawford fight if Spence was to face up with Charlo and then lose. So, it's starting to turn into a real funny situation with Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. I think that if Terence Crawford is trying to use that tactic, it's smart, for him to try to use that tactic to try to get Spence loosened up for him, because I don't think Terence Crawford can beat Spence at this point. I think he's preparing himself to lose at this point, because otherwise, why wouldn't you just sign off on it? Your fans have been saying up to this point, if there's a contract offered, you would sign off. You said that you would sign off. And it's been 2 weeks and you still are the quietest fighter. You had so much to say, just 3 weeks ago. Now you're just the quietest fighter. You're a church mouse fighter. And it's becoming the funniest thing, the most comical thing in the boxing world at this point. So, let me know what y'all think about that. Is Terence Crawford stalling this fight out until 2023 in hopes that Errol Spence Jr. has to face off with one of the young lion mandatory opponents that are sitting in the background waiting for him? Me personally, I think that's what's going on, and I think Terence Crawford has been knowing this the whole time, and he's just been he's been holding that little rabbit down in the hat just in case he needed to pull it out. So I'm going to leave it there from now. Hit that like button for me. Please subscribe. Holler at me on any social media platform that you would like to use. Facebook, Instagram, YouTubes. And we can chop it up. I'm mainly on YouTube, though, the YouTube comment section. So you're more than likely to get a response on YouTube than any other one, because the other platforms, it's more hate on those other platforms than anything. I really don't respond on them. So I think that's it for now. It's your boy Cardinal Bud Crawford, and we are out of here.
I be on my shit, I cannot slip, so I don't fucking let.